Imagine the train running from Rosenheim to Bad Reichenhall through the snow-covered foothills of the Alps, and you're gazing up at the snow-laden mountain slopes. Up there, on a mountain saddle at 1,180 meters, a woman waits for the next spring. The hut keeper, the guardian of mountain solitude. Her name is Ursula, and she's the winter keeper of the Hochalm mountain hut. For 4 years, she's spent the winter nights here alone, from December to April. Alone, you understand, without electricity, without running water, without other people except for those rare, passionate hikers who lose their way here in the depths of winter. The snow came early that year. Already in October, the first white blanket lay on the hut's roof like a warning, an omen. Ursula, in her mid-60s, with short white hair and hands darkened by decades of work, created her small world at the beginning of winter. She arranged supplies in shelves, checked the seals on the doors, repaired a hole in the roof shingles with tar and nails before the heavy snow came. The hut itself was built of wood 100 years ago, and it was a stroke of luck it still stood at all, hadn't collapsed under the weight of the decades. Thick beams of spruce and pine, wooden shingles on the roof, small windows with thick glass panes that steamed up in winter from the condensation of the indoor air. In winter, it was cold, terribly cold, and Ursula heated it with a great wood stove that stood in the center of the main room. The flames inside were her only company on the long nights, the only life she saw besides herself. The work a winter hut keeper does isn't spectacular, isn't dramatic, but it's important. More important than many works the world values. She shovels snow from the roofs before the ton-weight pressure damages the structure and crushes it down. She checks water pipes daily to ensure nothing's frozen and destroyed the lines. She records the temperature daily with an old thermometer, the snowfall with her eyes, the condition of the hut in her diary. She measures the snow with a meter stick. She holds everything together, so the hut is still there after the next season, still stable, still habitable for those who seek it, for those who need shelter. The days were terribly short. The sun hung low on the horizon, and sometimes, on the darkest winter days in January, it seemed not to shine at all. Instead, it remained dark all day long, only a pale gray somewhere between the mountains, a hint of weak light that made the snow visible but didn't warm it. Snow slid from the branches of the spruces and firs, made small explosions of white, small avalanches of powder. Ice crystals formed in the air, tiny glass refracting light. Ursula had routines, patterns that repeated daily, like a prayer, like a liturgy. Every morning, no matter how cold, no matter if it snowed or not, she went out with her broom and shovel and cleared the paths leading to the different corners of the hut. The path to the spring, which gave water even in winter if you didn't let the pipe freeze and sprayed it with hot water when necessary. The path to the woodshed, where boards were stored, where she chopped wood for the stove. The path to the outside toilet, which functioned in winter if you dared endure the painfully cold air, bitter as ice. She did this work slowly, with full attention, her thoughts sometimes elsewhere, with her daughter in Munich perhaps, or with her dead husband, who would have loved this work. The nights were long and dark and frightfully still, a silence so volumetric it almost had weight. She sat before the stove and read by candlelight, from old books left in the hut, books left by earlier winter keepers, diaries of men and women who'd known this solitude too. She wrote in her diary with pencil, noted small observations, small thoughts, like snow, 15 centimeters, cold wind from the north. A branch broke on one spruce under the snow. She ate simple meals, potatoes, soups from dried fruits and vegetables, bread she'd baked before winter and stored in the cold. She drank warm tea with honey, which helped keep her throat warm. She listened to the sounds of the hut, to the wooden beams cracking and creaking as they contracted and expanded in the cold, a silent language of the building. Sometimes, when the moon was full, she could see without candles, could do entirely without candlelight. The moonlight on the snow was so bright, everything looked overexposed, like a photographic negative of reality, like another world sleeping beneath the darkness. She'd go out then, just to look at the world, this moonlit mountain, this gleaming snowfield, this silence more beautiful than any music, greater and deeper than all the symphonies ever written or could be played. In these moments, she understood why she did this work, why she was here alone. Winter guests were rare, extraordinarily rare, almost non-existent. Sometimes, perhaps twice in an entire winter, a mountain hiker would pass by, a passionate person who had to climb mountains even in the depths of winter, who couldn't do without the peaks and heights. Ursula would welcome him like a saint, like an angel, would offer him warm tea, would listen to him tell of the world down below, of villages and cars and crowds and speed. She'd remember these conversations for weeks, would think them over again and again, would whisper them to herself in the silence of the nights. But mostly, usually, she was alone, entirely alone with the mountains and the snow. This was the beauty of this work, the hidden beauty of this winter solitude that only a few could understand. The solitude wasn't the problem, not anymore, not after 4 years. After 4 years, she'd learned to live with the silence, not to fight it, but to accept it and even love this sacred quiet. She'd learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. You could be alone and full of compassion, full of love, full of meaning. She was important to the hut, to its maintenance, to its safety, to its future. She protected this old structure from collapse under the weight of snow, from decay in the cold, from deterioration that destroys everything, from rot that waits everywhere. At the end of winter, when the snow began to melt and the first delicate crocuses emerged from the earth, purple and tender and brave, Ursula would leave. She'd abandon the hut, would walk down the mountain on foot, through snow and meltwater, through the awakening forests, into a warm village where there were other people and warmth and light and the humming life of civilization. But all the time, from December to April, from cold to rebirth, she would have kept watch over this hut, would have been guardian over this small island of humanity in a great wilderness of snow and stone, of silence and mountain. And now, as the train passes through the foothills and the huts are visible up there, small between the peaks, imagine Ursula in her room this night, sitting before her stove, listening to the wood crack, listening to the silence that's greater than all words. She is the heart of the hut, the pulse that keeps this old structure warm, alive, whole. She's alone, but not lonely, for she has work, she has purpose, She has meaning. She has a reason to rise tomorrow. Sleep now, knowing there are people who guard places, who remain alone in winter. People who are hut keepers, mountain guardians. And that these people make the world better. That their quiet work counts. The train rolled gently on, and outside, the world was now completely dark. Only a few lights in the distance, single windows where other people too were coming to rest. I thought about how many people in that moment all over the world were falling asleep, each in their bed, in their compartment, in their room, and how we were all part of a great, quiet movement, a movement into sleep. The rhythm of the wheels on the tracks, ta-dan, 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 was like the breathing of a great, friendly animal that carried us all together through the darkness, through time. I met the bird watcher on the line from Nebel to Dagobah on one of those mild April evenings when the first true spring arrives and the air smells of the sea. She sat with a large pair of binoculars round her neck, had quiet eyes, and that concentrated composure of someone who spent their whole life observing. "They come back in May," she said right away. "The Terns. They're on their way now from Africa, flying over the Sahara, over countries I'll never see. But they know where they're going. They come to the salt marshes of Amram, the same every year, and I'm there counting them." She told of her work with a passion audible in every syllable. For 25 years, she's counted the terns when they returned from the south, from their winter quarters in Africa. Not from science alone, but from love. She knows the birds, or at least is quite certain she does. She knows which females return, which new partners have paired up, which young have grown and are ready to breed. "That sounds mad," she said with a kind smile. "But the terns are real characters. Each one has its own personality. Here," she said, showing me pictures and sketches in a worn notebook. "This is Frida. Frida comes every year since I first saw her 2 decades ago. She always nests on the same stone, the same nest. And this male here, the black one, I think is her husband. They've been together many years now, a real Tern couple." She described the bird's return like a great festival she gets to experience every year, a spring feast of nature. In April, it begins very quietly. Individual birds appear, scouts, so to speak, who check whether everything's still in order at the breeding places. And then in May, when the sun stays longer in the sky and the nights grow short, they all come at once. Hundreds, thousands of terns, flying over each other, screeching and calling, wild with joy at being home again. "The intensity of that time is absolutely overwhelming," she said. "You can feel the energy, the pure life force. The birds are wild, excited, joyful. They nest again. They begin their lives again after all those months of travel. And you as a human stand there observing and wondering and marveling. It's like a spiritual experience, a sacred time of nature." She told of difficult years when fewer birds returned than expected. Climate change, the slow rising of water levels, increasing ocean pollution, and overfishing. Last year, they arrived late, much later than normal. She'd never experienced that in all her years. The birds took longer for the journey. She saw that clearly. She'd been very worried. "I thought maybe they're all gone. Maybe they'll never come back," she said. "But they did come," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "They're real survival artists, the best of all. They don't know that their world is changing, that the sea is warming, that fish are becoming fewer. They only know they have to go home, back to the salt marshes. That's a lesson I've learned. Nature is tougher than we think, but also more fragile, more vulnerable than we understand.
She showed me her large list, notebooks thick, page after page of numbers and names and sketches and observations. Over 1,000 observations of individual birds over the years.
I don't know them all personally, she said, laughing. But I know the places where they nest. I know the rhythms of their return. I know the seasons of the terns better than my own seasons. In May, when I'm on Amrum, on that flat island between endless sky and endless sea, I'm happiest, she said, her voice full of deep longing. I sit there at sunrise with my old binoculars and I count. I count every single tern that arrives, as if they were my children returning after a long absence. And as I count, as I see these birds come back from the warm south, I feel I'm part of something greater. I feel connected with the whole world. I feel part of the great migration, the great rhythms of nature, of life itself, the eternal circle. This work has taught me what it means to love, she said slowly. Patience and observation and deep attention. When you really observe nature, when you truly look, you understand that everything is connected. The bird in Africa and the bird on Amrum are connected. That's me, that's you, that's the whole world. We're all one in this great migration. She asked if I knew the terns. Small white birds with black wingtips and a black cap on their head, very elegant. They're masters of flying, she said, with wonder in her voice. They can fly over 100 kilometers per hour if they want. They can plunge like arrows into the water to catch fish. They're small, but they're warriors, real survival fighters. They fly across 2 continents to come to me. That's incredible. She spoke with quiet intensity about her own love for this work, how she never grows tired. She could have a normal life, she said, an office job in the city, a comfortable house, a car. But the terns pull her. That's her passion. They're my life. In May, when they return from their journeys, that's when I'm truly alive. The rest of the year I wait. I'm desperate for that time. She also told of difficult personal times, when she was alone and sad. But the terns always came back. They gave her reason to continue. They gave her structure and purpose. My life without the birds would have been empty, she said. But with them, with my task to count and protect them, everything makes sense. She also spoke of what it feels like when the terns begin to breed on the salt marshes. The pairs build small nests from grass and stones, hidden and vulnerable. Sometimes tragedies happen. Predators come or the weather turns bad and stormy. But usually they succeed. The young grow up under the constant watchfulness and care of their parents. And then in July, when the new terns are ready for their great journey, I'm there counting them too, watching how they prepare for the long journey to Africa they'll soon have to make. The train approached Dagobul, the important harbor from which you take a ship to the island of Amrum, my paradise. I can already see the sea, she said, leaning forward with undisguised impatience and anticipation. Soon I'll be on Amrum. Soon I'll see the salt marshes again, the flat sandbanks, the sacred places where the terns breed and raise their young. Soon I'll count all those precious birds again. That's the best time of my life. That's why I live. And the train rolls on, wheels rattling in the rhythm of nature and migration. And through the window, I already see the first gulls flying over the green flats, and I still hear the loud voices of the terns in my ears, and my eyes grow heavier and heavier with tiredness. And I dream of bird flights and salt wind and spring, and of the black caps of the terns, and everything grows light and peaceful and wonderfully warm. The train rolled gently on, and outside, the world had grown quite dark. Just a few lights in the distance, solitary windows where others too were settling into sleep.
I thought about all the people in the world at that moment, each in their bed, their compartment, their room, and how we were all part of one great, quiet movement, a movement towards sleep. The rhythm of wheels on the rails, clack, 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 was like the breathing of some large, friendly creature carrying us all together through the dark, through time. And as the train rolled on through the night, clack, 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 I noticed my thoughts growing slower, the images in my head growing softer, the edges becoming blurred. The voices I'd heard became a gentle humming, a humming like distant bees, or like an old song heard as a child and now only half remembered. The warm air in the carriage wrapped around me like a blanket, and I felt my shoulders slowly dropping, the day's tension falling away from me piece by piece, like leaves falling from a tree, without hurry, without sorrow. I met the Ropemaker on the line from Bremen to Bremerhaven, on one of those first mild April days when the light over the Wadden Sea turns golden and the air smells of harbor and industry and salt water and possibility. She sat across from me with thick, strong hands and powerful presence, the eyes of someone who works with real things, who has changed the world with their hands. "It's a dying trade," she said without preamble. "Most ropes are now made in big factories in China, with machines, quickly, cheaply. But there are still people who make hand-twisted rope, the real stuff, the real material. That's my workshop in Bremerhaven at the harbor. There I still make rope the way my great-grandfather did, the way my grandfather did, the way the masters before me." She spoke of her workshop with a mixture of pride and nostalgic sadness. "It's small, very small," she said. "In an old warehouse at Bremerhaven Harbor. The tools are old tools, some over 100 years old, passed down generation to generation. But they work better than any modern equipment, better than any new machine. You can't do with machines what my hands do, what the hands of the masters before me have done." She showed me her hands with quiet pride. Large, deeply scarred from decades of work, incredibly strong and muscular. "These aren't delicate white office hands," she said with a crooked smile. "These are real working hands, hands that twist ropes, real ropes people can trust, ropes you can stake your life on. Look," she said, pointing to long, deep scars on her forearms and palms. "These are from the fibers, from the roughness of the raw material. Hemp ropes can scratch your hands, they can cut, they can make you bleed. But that's the price you pay when you practice real craftsmanship, when you demand quality." She explained to me the old art of rope making with great passion. "You take hemp fibers," she said, or formerly other raw materials, and you twist them together in complex patterns. But it's not simple braiding, it's a complex choreography of movement and force and timing. Every layer must be perfect, precise. The tension must be exactly right, neither too loose nor too tight. Too loose and the rope grows weak, tears easily. Too tight and the rope becomes brittle and breaks. "Spring is a good time for rope making," she said, with knowledge from many years. "The weather grows warmer, the air more humid, and the hemp fibers work better. They're more supple. In hard winter, they become brittle and splintery. They break easily. But in spring, when the sun shines longer and temperatures rise, that's when you can make the very best ropes. The old masters have known this for generations." She spoke of her few customers with a mixture of gratitude and deep pessimism. "There are still old fishermen who want real hemp rope, who understand that cheap isn't good, that quality matters. There are still small traditional ships built the old way that need real ropes. There are still people who understand that handmade is better, that it lasts longer, that it's more reliable when it counts. But fewer every year, fewer and fewer every year. The world likes it fast and cheap and easy, and the world doesn't care about quality or tradition. My father, she said, her voice full of history, didn't want me to do this work. He said it's hard work, no life for a woman. But I wanted it. I was curious about the ropes, about the workshop, about my family's long history. And when my grandfather died, he left me the workshop. With one condition, she said quietly, that I pass on the tradition, that I don't let it die. I'm one of the few women who still make ropes, she said with quiet pride. That makes me proud and sometimes lonely. It's very hard physical work. The arms hurt, the back hurts. It's sometimes monotonous, the same movements again and again. But it's real work, real craftsmanship. Every rope I make could save a life. That makes it important. She told of a trawler that sank many years ago in a storm because of a defective rope. Many people died, whole families. And it was a cheap Chinese rope, she said, pain in her voice. The rope broke at the wrong moment. I thought if they'd bought one of my ropes instead of the cheap one, maybe those people would still be alive. That haunted me for years. It still haunts me. Since then, she said, I make my ropes with even more care and attention. Every single rope is like a promise to the world. A promise that it won't break when it counts. A promise that it holds people safe, that it saves lives. That's very serious work. In spring, when the air grows fresher and the sun shines longer, I feel better in the workshop. The light falls differently from the windows. The hemp fibers seem brighter and alive. It's a blessed time for the trade, a time of renewal. I make my very best ropes in spring, she said with conviction. When the world is reborn, I'm reborn too, more energetic, more hopeful. She spoke still of the deeper meditation that comes with this work. When you twist a rope, when you make the movements again and again in the same rhythm, your thoughts become clear and quiet. Your mind is freed from worries. That's real meditation for me, she said softly. That's my yoga, my prayer, my spiritual practice. With every rope I twist, I myself become clearer, purer, closer to something higher. She also spoke of her deepest dream, that someone will carry on this old tradition after her when she grows too old. I have no children, she said sadly. It's very hard to find a partner or companion who understands this heavy work, who doesn't think a rope maker is strange. But sometimes young people come to the workshop, curious, wanting to learn the old craft. Maybe, she said with flickering hope, maybe one of them will carry on the tradition, will inherit the workshop. That's my dream, she said. That the workshop doesn't die. That someone learns how to make real ropes. That's my greatest dream. More important than money, more important than fame. Just that the old craftsmanship survives. That someone still understands why real ropes matter. The train slowed, and we saw the first giant cranes of Bremerhaven Harbor appear. There's my workshop, she said, pointing to the sleepy old harbor area where small warehouses stand. A small, inconspicuous warehouse among all the big container terminals and modern facilities. But that's okay, she said. The ropes don't care whether they lie beside containers or not. They only know they're well made. And the train rolls on, wheels rattling in the rhythm of old rope making. And through the window, I still see those strong, weathered hands, and I still smell hemp and salt water and Bremerhaven, and I still hear the whirring of twisted ropes, and my eyes grow heavier and heavier, and I dream of ropes and complicated knots and great strength, and of deep love for real craftsmanship and real work, and everything grows still and warm and safe, like a good, strong rope. And somewhere in this dark landscape, I thought, other people are sleeping in their beds, in their houses, and the moon looks down on them, and the moon looks down on us, and everything is in its place. The fields are in their place, the forests are in their place, the rivers are in their place, and I'm in mine, here in this carriage, in this warm cradle of wood and cloth and metal that carries me where I need to go, asking nothing but that I trust and rest. I closed my eyes. Just for a moment, I thought. Just for a moment. But then images came behind the lids. No clear images, just colors. Soft colors, blue and gray, and a bit of gold from the lamp in the carriage. And these colors mixed into something that was no longer seeing and not yet dream. The train rolled on, clack, 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 and each clack, clack was a bit further away, as though the train wasn't quite in the same space as I anymore, as though I were already half somewhere else, half in that land where tiredness lives, where everything grows simple. I met the Barge Woman on the line from Lear to Emden, on one of those warming April days when the spring light turns golden over the river dikes, and the air smells of river water and tar and the green hinterland. She sat across from me with the quiet, wise look of someone who has truly known the water their whole life, really and completely. I've been captaining my barge on the Ems since I was 17 years old, she said directly. It's a flatboat, perfect for rivers, not for the open sea. The Ems is my home, my path, my whole life. I transport freight from Lear to Emden, or sometimes far up the Ems into the city. Everything that's heavy and voluminous, cargo too valuable or too large for normal wagons, I carry it in my barge. She described the boat with an unmistakable, deep love. The barge is flat, she said. The ships are wide, not particularly long. That means we can travel in very shallow water where large commercial ships could never go. The Ems isn't deep everywhere. The Ems varies, sometimes deep, sometimes very shallow. In the shallow sections, only real barge captains can work and travel. It's very old work, she said with nostalgia. Hundreds of years, perhaps 1,000. People travel with flat boats on the Ems, bringing goods from place to place, using the river as a road. My family has done this for a long time. My father was a barge captain, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, all barge captains. I'm perhaps the last barge captain still working on this river. She described the complicated rhythms of the water, how absolutely important it is to know when the tide comes, when the ebb begins, how long the water levels last. The barge doesn't need much water, but not too little. At ebb, you sometimes can't travel if you don't know where the dangerous shallow places are. The knowledge is in my bones, she said. I feel the ebb in the water. I know the rhythm like my heartbeat. In spring, the Ems comes alive and wild, she said. Cold meltwater comes from the rivers up in Germany and Holland. The river grows wider, stronger, faster, more unpredictable. Barge captaincy becomes much more difficult and risky. The current is much stronger, but also so much more beautiful. Spring makes everything more beautiful, alive, full of possibility. The air is warmer, the sun shines longer, and the river looks golden and fiery at sunrise. She told of great heavy loads she'd transported over the years. Tree trunks from the forests, stones for building, grain from farmers, metal. Everything heavy and voluminous that fits on the barge. Sometimes the cargo is even goods from abroad, imported over the sea. Everything happens on the Ems. The small, flat river is like a great, important artery of trade and human life. It's definitely not easy or safe work, she said quietly. The EMS can be very unpredictable and dangerous for the careless. The current can suddenly grow strong when the meltwater comes. The weather can change quickly and dramatically, Heavy and unbalanced cargo can tip and suddenly capsize the whole barge. You must always be careful, always present with all your senses and instincts. I've had many difficult and truly dangerous moments on the EMS in my life, but I've never gotten into blind panic. The river and I, we've understood each other a long time now, for 50 years. She spoke of her crew, the faithful men who work on the barge with her every day. It's real deep teamwork, she said. The barge doesn't sail alone. Impossible. One man can't do this alone. It takes several strong, experienced hands to load the heavy cargo properly, to steer the barge safely, to travel safely on unpredictable rivers. I trust my men completely and unconditionally. Some have worked with me on this beloved barge for many years. In April, when spring slowly comes, it's especially beautiful and magical on the Ems, she said with dreamy joy. The willows along the bank turn green and delicate. The birds come back from their far winter quarters. The sun shines longer in the sky and gives warmth. The air smells wonderfully of damp earth and new sprouting life and hope. And the Ems itself grows more beautiful and alive and faster. The light on the water is golden and red and orange at sunrise. That's my most beloved time of the whole year, when I'm truly happiest. She also told how few barge captains remain on the Ems nowadays. Most young people don't want this work anymore. They say it's too strenuous, too physical, too unsafe, too old, too dirty. They want safe office jobs. They want security and insurance. They want to live in the city. But there are still barge captains needed, she said. There are still people needed who have that old river knowledge, the knowledge not found in books. I tried to teach my son, she said with deep pain. I wanted him to take over the barge, to carry on the tradition. But he didn't want to. He wanted away from the Ems, away from Lear, away from the river and the old life. I understood that. The world draws young people elsewhere, to computers, to cities. But it hurts deeply that the tradition ends with me. The Ems will always exist, she said quietly. The Ems will flow long after I'm dead, but it won't have barge captains anymore. Or perhaps a few old ones like me, but no young ones to pass on the knowledge. That's sad, but it's also life. The Ems will flow on after I'm gone, she said, quietly and accepting. Perhaps other barge captains will travel, or perhaps just a few old men. The Ems won't stop existing, of course. The river will always flow. But I'll probably be the last true barge captain on this barge. That's okay. That's just life, history, the world changing. But there's real beauty in that too, she said, that I'm the last. I'm the end point of a long and honorable history. I carry all my great-grandmothers and grandmothers and mothers in my body and spirit when I travel on the Ems. Their old, strong hands guide my barge through the water. Their entire experience and knowledge is preserved in my body. The train approached Emden, the city by the sea at the mouth of the Ems. I'm almost home, she said with visible relief. In Emden lies my boat, my beloved barge. My true home is on the water, not on dry land. The train is beautiful, fast, comfortable, civilized. But my true, deepest home is the Ems, the barge, the living water that carries me and has known me for so many years. And the train rolls on, wheels rattling in the rhythm of flowing water. And through the window, I already see the Ems flowing silver and golden in the evening sun. And I still hear the splashing of water against the barge, the cries of gulls and terns. And my eyes grow heavier and heavier, and I dream of flat boats and heavy cargo and the river arteries of the world, and of strong women carrying old, forgotten knowledge, and of the Ems that flows eternal. and everything grows soft and moist and gentle and quiet, like a quiet old river going home. And as the train rolled on through the night, clack, 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 I noticed my thoughts growing slower, the images in my head growing softer, the edges becoming blurred. The voices I'd heard became a gentle humming, a humming like distant bees, or like an old song heard as a child and now only half remembered. The warm air in the carriage wrapped around me like a blanket, and I felt my shoulders slowly dropping, the day's tension falling away from me piece by piece, like leaves falling from a tree, without hurry, without sorrow. The train rolled gently on, and outside the world had grown quite dark. Just a few lights in the distance, solitary windows where others too were settling into sleep. I thought about all the people in the world at that moment, each in their bed, their compartment, their room, and how we were all part of one great, quiet movement, a movement towards sleep. The rhythm of wheels on the rails, clack, 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 was like the breathing of some large, friendly creature carrying us all together through the dark, through time. I met the potter on a train from Meissen to Dresden on an October evening when the mist lay so deep over the Elbe that you could only hear the water, a quiet, patient rushing somewhere beneath the grey. The station in Meissen smelled of wet leaves and the smoke from chimneys you couldn't see, and the train stood there like something that has waited a long time. She sat by the window, a woman around 50, with short dark hair and a face that was still in a way that reminded me of clay pots, round and solid, and without hurry. On her lap lay a box, not large, wrapped in newspaper, and she held it the way you hold something that isn't quite finished yet. Not tight, not loose. Attentive. What struck me wasn't her clothes or her shoes, or the way she sat. It was the dust. A fine, pale dust on her forearms, on her neck, in the creases of her elbows. Not flour, not chalk. Clay. I knew that dust because, as a child, I'd watched a potter in a village I barely remember now. But I remember the dust, the color, the feeling when it dries between your fingers and tightens the skin. She noticed me looking at the dust and smiled, briefly, almost apologetically. "I never managed to wash it all away," she said. "It's part of me. The 30 years now. You could put me in a bath for a week and it would still be there somewhere, in a pore, under a fingernail. My husband says I'll eventually turn to clay myself." I asked what was in the box, and she carefully folded back the newspaper. A bowl, no bigger than 2 handfuls, grey-brown, with a glaze that turned bluish in some places and was almost transparent in others, like ice on a puddle when the sun comes through. It wasn't perfect. One side was slightly thicker than the other, and on the rim was a dent, barely visible, like a fingerprint that had stayed there. "For a gallery in Dresden," she said. "They wanted something from me. I've been working on it for 3 months. Not on this one bowl, you understand, but on perhaps 40, 50. And this is the one that's left. The only one I didn't break." I looked at her, at this small bowl in her hands, and thought of the 49 others that were gone, of the weeks that lay in pieces. And she turned the bowl slowly, and the light from the train lamp moved across the glaze like water over stones. Then she began to tell me. Not about the bowl,
and not about the glaze, and not about the gallery, but about the clay. About what it feels like the first time you take a lump of clay in your hand. Cold, she said. Always cold at first. And heavy, heavier than you think. And then you start kneading it, and the clay grows warmer and softer and more yielding, and at some point you feel, I don't know how to explain it, you feel that it's ready, that it wants to. She made a movement in the air with her hands, both of them, as though shaping something only she could see, and I watched her fingers move, slowly, circling, pressing and releasing, and it was like a dance, like a conversation between her hands and something invisible. The clay wasn't there, but her hands knew exactly where it would be. "The wheel turns," she said, "and you center the lump, and then you pull it up, very slowly, very evenly, and the clay rises between your fingers, and you have to, you see, you have to hold and let go at the same time. That's the hardest part. You press from the outside so the shape stays, and from the inside so the space emerges. And if you press too hard, everything collapses. And if you press too little, it stays a lump." She didn't say that was a metaphor for anything. She just kept telling. About the drying that takes days, and you mustn't look because you'll grow impatient. About the firing at 1,000 degrees, where anything can happen and you have no more control, only trust. About the glaze you apply, and that becomes a different color when fired than what you applied, and sometimes more beautiful, and sometimes not, and you don't know until the kiln cools. And then she wrapped the bowl again, carefully, layer by layer, and laid it on her lap. Outside it had grown dark. The lights of Radebule slid past, yellow and soft behind the mist, and the train pushed itself through the Elbe Valley like something that knows its way, even though it can't see anything. At some point, I asked why she'd broken the other 49, and she looked out the window for a while, into the mist, and then she said, very simply, because they weren't this one. She didn't say more. She closed her eyes, leaned her head against the window, the box on her lap, and her breathing became slower and calmer, and I could see the clay dust on her forearms shimmer in the train lamp light, very fine, very pale, like something that belongs to the skin. And I watched her sleep. This woman who'd made 50 bowls and broken 49, and the one that remained lay on her lap like a sleeping animal, safe and warm and exactly where it belonged. The train travels on, and the Elbe rushes somewhere out there in the mist, and my eyes grow heavy, and I think of clay that's cold at first and grows warm when you hold it long enough, and of the silence that comes when the kiln goes cold, and you wait and trust, and slowly, very slowly, let go. Make yourself comfortable, friend. I want to tell you about Katerina, who ventures out into her fields in autumn in Slovakia, when the nights grow cool and those great green heads have finally reached their full strength. The train rattles out from Bratislava, the platform disappearing behind you, and soon you're gazing through the windows at the Slovakian landscape stretching out for kilometers on end, like some vast green book with endless pages. You see fields everywhere, just fields, all of them, and if you look carefully, you can make out the cabbage heads in perfect rows, green and substantial and firm, rather like soldiers standing at evening parade,
Katerina knows every one of those rows, every single furrow, every stone in the dark earth. She planted them herself in spring, back when the days were still short and the sun barely warmed the ground. She pressed every seedling into the damp earth with her work-hardened fingers, patted it down so it wouldn't slip back up, watered it, and then waited, weeks on end, for that tiny thing to grow and grow and grow. Now, in late September and early October, when the autumn wind sweeps across the fields and the air smells of mist and damp earth and something faintly sweet, the season arrives that Katerina has both longed for and dreaded all year. Harvest time. The hardest work, but also the most beautiful. The time that gives her life meaning. The time that makes her feel truly alive. The cabbage doesn't come easily from the earth. You can't simply tear at it like a weed. That would ruin everything, damage all the leaves. Katerina must wait until the morning sun has burned the frost from the outer leaves, and then she takes her old spade, a tool that's already 5 decades old, and digs and loosens the soil. She must work under each head, carefully, carefully. Must lift the whole weight without a single valuable leaf tearing or breaking. She works for hours alone in that field. Sometimes her daughter comes to help, but mostly it's just Katerina and the great autumn sky, turning gray and then orange and red and gold as the sun sinks behind the mountains. Her back aches after such days, she won't deny that, but it's a good sort of ache. The ache of work that means something, that creates something, that brings something worthwhile into the world. The first batch she brings to her old workshop, the cellar of her house, a large damp room of stone and dark wood that's come to smell after all these decades of harvests and fermentations in a way that's both sweet and sour and alive all at once, utterly unmistakable. Here, the real craft begins, the craft her mother knew, and her grandmother, and her great-grandmother before that. She takes the heads from her basket and positions herself at the old wooden board where cabbage has been cut 1,000 times, where the knife marks and scratches of decades are visible. With a great knife she inherited from her mother, one that's heavy and familiar in her hand, she begins to cut. The blade is sharp, gleaming in the weak cellar light, and the movement is always the same, in at the top, out at the bottom, and a tissue-thin slice falls away. The knife whispers, 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 and with each cut, a whole head becomes a mountain of white and pale green, thin, parallel ribbons. She's made this movement thousands of times, perhaps hundreds of thousands in her life, and her hands know exactly what pressure is right, where to place the blade, when it's grown too dull and needs sharpening. There's a rhythm to it, almost a dance, something only someone who's done the same thing for decades, every autumn, year after year, can truly understand. In large wooden barrels and in old stoneware pots, in glass jars too, which she's collected over the years, she mixes the cabbage with salt. The salt is the secret, the heart of the whole art, what the old-timers knew. The salt draws out the cabbage's own juice, and that juice, that glorious cabbage brine, is what preserves everything later, what protects the sauerkraut from rot and spoilage. She takes the freshly cut cabbage in her hands, still cool and wet from the cutting, and kneads it, presses it, kneads again and again. Her fists work into the mass, pressing, pressing, pressing with all the strength of her shoulders, until slowly, slowly, the juice rises and the cabbage becomes covered from above by a shimmering, salty liquid that looks like liquid gold. This work lasts many hours, from early morning until late evening. Her forearms grow tired, redder and redder with effort. Her hands swell and redden from the salt. But she doesn't stop, because she knows this is the most important moment. The moment when raw cabbage transforms into something new, something alive, something that will ferment, that will change itself as the weeks pass and the seasons turn. The days grow shorter and shorter. Mist lies over the empty fields each morning like a gray ghost and doesn't disappear until the sun climbs high enough. When Katerina rises in the dark, when it's still night and the stars are still out, and heads to work, She wraps a thick wool shawl around her shoulders and pulls on old gloves with holes in them, sometimes gaps in the fingers too. In her cellar, the cabbage is fermenting now, day after day, week after week, and the fermentation is alive and active, a silent alchemy that needs no human hand. The smell that rises from the barrels is magnificently sour and alive and strong, a smell that won't be washed away, that clings to the walls and sinks into the wooden beams like a guest who means to stay. Sometimes, when she descends into the cellar's cold, she lifts the old linen cloth that lies over one of the barrels and peers down into the depths, into the mass. She sees the tiny bubbles rising, the signs of fermentation, the signs of life, and she nods, quietly satisfied. That's good. That'll be excellent, just as it should be. Exactly so. She makes the train journey to Kozice, to the eastern end of her route, every year once the harvest is done and the finished sauerkraut is finally ready to sell. She takes boxes full of it with her, sealed jars and small barrels, and when you open those boxes, you're met at once with that characteristic, unmistakable smell, a smell like life itself, like earth and salt and time. The finished sauerkraut is pale and golden and beautiful to look at, and it doesn't smell like the cheap factory-made stuff, but rather like life, like craftsmanship, like history, like autumn. She sells it at the market in Kozice, on the same square where her mother sold, where her grandmother sold, long before the war, long before all the crises and difficulties. People come from far away because they know Katerina's sauerkraut is the real thing, not the thin, inferior factory product from the city, but genuine, hand-processed sauerkraut made from her patience, her knowledge, her love, year after year, autumn after autumn. It's a heritage she carries forward, a knowledge that must not be lost. The train rocks you gently back and forth now, and you notice night falling over you like a warm blanket, your eyes growing heavier, your breathing becoming steadier and more even. Katerina sits somewhere in a compartment, tired from her work, but filled with a quiet contentment that runs deeper than words. Her fingers smell of salt and cabbage. Her back still aches, but it's a good ache now, an ache that's transforming into rest. When she closes her eyes, she sees the filled jars in her mind's eye, each one a piece of her autumn labor, a piece of her love for this land, for this earth that she knows as well as her own skin. The train carries you into the night, and you're welcome to travel in dreams, to dream of Katerina's hands, of that glorious smell, of the security of decades of craft that continues on, year after year. And so we traveled on, the train and I and the few other passengers in my compartment or in the ones beside us, each in their own little corner of the world, each on their own path toward sleep. The warmth of the carriage, the quiet crackle of the heating, the clack-clack of wheels on the rails, all of it became a single song, a song without words, a song that carries you and soothes you and says, "You may let go now. You may rest now." The train travels on for you. Time travels on for you. The world sorts itself out while you sleep.
Settle yourself in and let your head rest back, my friend. Let me tell you about Miroslav, who lives in the Bohemian hills and makes the most remarkable Śliwowice every autumn from the plums that fall from the sky. The train pulls out of České Budějovice in the late afternoon, and you gaze out across the South Bohemian landscape, all red and gold in the dying sun. Everywhere you look, there are plum trees, old ones and young ones, trees that Miroslav knows like his own home, like his own children. Some belong to him, mind you, some to his neighbors and relatives, but when the fruit falls, when it's ripe and heavy with sweetness, well, ownership doesn't really matter, does it? They must be gathered. They must ferment. They must become Śliwowice, that Bohemian plum brandy that's known the world over. respected by those who understand such things. Miroslav is an old man now. His back isn't as straight as it once was, and his hands shake sometimes from the cold. But they're still strong, still powerful, still full of life. His eyes remain sharp and clear when it comes to the plums, to the distillery, to the craft itself. He can smell a single fruit and know whether it's ripe, whether it has just the right sugar content, whether it's ready for fermentation and distillation. He learned that from his father, who learned it from his father before him, and his before that. Generations reaching back to when the craft was sacred, when the guild councils still held sway, when people took pride in their work. The plums lie everywhere on the ground. They rest beneath the trees, deep crimson and dark purple and blue. Some still hard and green, some already too ripe, growing soft, beginning their slow decay. Miroslav moves about with great baskets, gathering them carefully, checking each one, setting aside the damaged ones. Sometimes he sits down when his back aches, when his legs grow tired, and he rests and watches the trees. Then he rises again and carries on. There's so much to do. There's always so much to do in autumn in South Bohemia. Back at home in his old distillery, in a room built of thick red brick that's absorbed 100 years of work and carries the smell of it, the real transformation begins. The plums are first washed in cold water. The soil must come off. The leaves must be rinsed away. Then they're crushed in great wooden or metal vessels, and Miroslav works with full force using wooden mallets until the fruit becomes a thick paste, until the juice flows, until everything's thoroughly mixed. There's a moment, a magical moment, when the fruit begins to open, when it surrenders, when the cell walls break and everything spills out. The sweetness, the aroma, the very essence and soul of the fruit. The scent in that moment is indescribable, spiced and fruity, like summer itself trapped in a room. He leaves the mash to ferment in great barrels, sometimes weeks, sometimes 2 months, sometimes longer, depending on the sun that year, how ripe the fruit was, the temperature in the distillery. Fermentation is a mystery, you see, a great mystery. You can't force it or hurry it along. You can only wait and watch, and occasionally adjust the temperature, open or close the windows. The yeast, the wild yeast that sits on the plums, that's what does all the work, converting the sugar to alcohol, slowly, week after week. Miroslav trusts it. He trusts the process, the old process, the one that stayed the same for 1,000 years, the one that can't really change because nature won't allow it. After fermentation comes the distilling, and that's the crucial part, the critical moment, when heat and alcohol vapors come together, when you must be extraordinarily careful, when a moment's carelessness could mean fire, could mean explosion. Miroslav has an old copper still, a great gleaming machine of red copper that his grandfather bought, probably before the war. It sits in that brick room, and when the heat starts under the great kettle, when the fire roars and flares, you know the magic is beginning, that something wonderful is about to happen. The first spirit that comes through the spout is too strong, too rough, too sharp. That's the foreshot, as Miroslav calls it. It's nearly poisonous, not meant for drinking. Miroslav throws it away without hesitation, won't risk anyone poisoning themselves on it. Then, after a while, comes the good part, the heart of the run, what we call the middle cut. That's it. That's the finest spirit you'll ever taste in your life. Clear as water, crystalline, but with an aroma that speaks of plums, that smells of spring and summer and autumn, that carries the scent of ancient barrels, the scent of history itself. By October, the leaves are gold and scarlet and orange, a fireworks display that the eye can't get enough of. Mist lies over the fields and hills each morning, like a blanket you can't see through. When Miroslav rises early, when it's still dark, when stars are still visible, he sees the damp earth, the grass blades glistening with dew, the plums not yet gathered, still lying in the mud, either not ripe enough or too ripe, it's hard to say. The sky slowly turns grey, then pink, then red, and then the sun comes up. His wife, she's old now too, tired from living. She sits in the kitchen with a cup of hot tea. She tells him he should stop, that he's old enough, that he should rest, that someone else, his sons perhaps, or his son-in-law, should do the work. But Miroslav, he can't. This is his life. This is what he is, all that he knows. The distillery smells like nothing you'll ever forget. It's the scent of fermenting fruit, of alcohol vapors, of fire and copper, of wood and 1,000 autumns. A smell that takes you back to his father, back to all the fathers who've done this work. The smell is everywhere, in his clothes, in his hair, on his skin, in his lungs. He couldn't wash it away even if he wanted to. And he doesn't want to. The slivovitz sits then in bottles. Some ends up in wooden barrels where it matures, where it's given time to become what it wants to be, what it can be. A year, 2 years, sometimes 5, depending on how old the barrels are, on how patient Miroslav can be. He has barrels marked 1985, marked 1990, barrels older than young people, older than kings and countries. The train slows, the rhythm shifts, and we move into the darkness of the night. Miroslav sits somewhere in a compartment, tired, but with a deep satisfaction in his heart. His hands smell of plums and alcohol. His back aches from the day's work, but that's all right. That's the way of things. The work was good, was worthwhile. The plums were ripe. The fermentation was strong and healthy. The spirit will be good, will be excellent. In a few months, when the weather turns cold, when winter comes, he'll open the barrels and drink, or give some to an old friend, or take it to market to sell. The slivovitze will be his life, will be his legacy. Every last drop, every last breath. Sleep now, my friend, and dream of Miroslav's hands crushing the fruit, of the distillery's scent, of the warmth of the barrels beneath your fingers, of the burning sweet taste of 100 years of Bohemian craft. The train carries you into the night, and Miroslav sits awake in his compartment, waiting for the next autumn, the next plums, the next chance to make slivovitz the way the old masters taught him. The scent follows him everywhere, will never leave him, will be his life until the end. The train passed through a tunnel, and for a short moment there was only darkness outside. Just the rumble, just the echo of the wheels against the tunnel walls. Ta-dam, ta-dam. And then we were out again, and the night took us back like a mother gathering her child into her arms after a brief adventure. I thought how beautiful that is. Tunnel and night, then tunnel again and night again, on and on, and on and on. And after a while, you stop knowing what's outside and what's in, because it all blurs together, becomes one. Because sleep is so close now, you can almost smell it. Come here and sit beside me, friend. Let me tell you about Sophia, who lives in a small village in Masuria and sorts down feathers in a workshop that smells like a museum, like the past itself. The train runs from Olsztyn to Elk, through Polish landscapes that are flat and melancholic, mysterious and old. Landscapes that look as though they've stepped out of another century. The lakes gleam like enormous mirrors in the autumn sun, and the forests are deep and dark and full of mystery, full of life you can't quite see. Zofia knows this region like her own soul. She's lived here her whole life, over 70 years, and she'll die here too. She knows the lakes like the lines on her face, knows every bay, every name, every fish that swims in them, every story the old people have told. She knows the forests, dark and mysterious, thick and endless, where mushrooms grow and wild boar roam. And when autumn comes, when the air turns sharp and cool, when the geese fly south in their great formations on their way to winter, that's when the season begins. The season Zofia has waited for and prepared for all year long. The geese fly over the village in great V formations, calling out, their cries carrying far across the land, waking you in the night, reminding you of nature herself. They head south to overwinter, to survive, and somewhere in the world they're slaughtered, their feathers taken. And these precious feathers, so light, so warm, find their way to her little workshop in Masuria, to her room filled with white and grey feathers, with history itself. Zofia is well over 70 now. Her eyes aren't as sharp as they once were, not as quick. They need more light now. But her hands are still perfect, still wonderful. They can sort feathers by touch alone, can feel which is the soft down, which are the longer flight feathers, which are the stiff contour feathers. All of that you can sense when you've worked at it for decades, when your hands have been trained by 1,000 years of family knowledge. The workshop is a large room with tall windows that let in light so golden it seems almost magical. Everywhere you look, there are feathers, mountains of them, hills of them, at different stages of processing, different levels of cleanliness, different sorts entirely. A great part of the work is washing. The feathers must be completely clean. Every bit of dirt must come away. Every trace of blood must be gone. Anything that isn't pure must be removed. Zofia has large wooden or metal containers filled with water that she heats over a small stove, and she washes the feathers in hot water with gentle soap, very carefully, very tenderly, so the fine inner structure isn't damaged, so the beauty is preserved. She works at it for hours on end, her hands in warm water, her hands red and nearly scalded. But she carries on, because that's the way, that's the method. She takes the feathers, sorts them, washes them, sets them aside, takes more, tends to everything with great care and great love. Once the feathers are washed, they must dry, must be given time. They lie on great white cloths, spread out in the sun, or before the stove when the weather turns cool and the rain and fog come. And Zofia turns them over several times a day, spreads them out, makes sure none are stuck together, none are knotted. The smell of damp feathers is peculiar, not unpleasant, simply the smell of work and life and nature. The smell of 1,000 geese, somewhere flying now. Then comes the sorting, the most important work, the work that matters. The down, the finest, lightest, softest feathers. These must be separated from the longer feathers, the flight feathers, the stiff contour feathers, from all the jumble. Zofia sits at a great table with excellent light from the tall windows and takes each feather singly between her fingers. She feels it, senses it, knows what sort it is, what kind, what grade. Then she sets it carefully on one of the many piles growing before her, and after hours and hours and hours of concentrated work, order emerges from the chaotic, undifferentiated mass. Beautiful, sorted piles, magnificent order. The down, the fine white or grey down, this goes into the finest pillows, into the most expensive, most luxurious quilts in the world, into the grand hotels and the wealthy homes, into the bedrooms where people dream. The material is then taken to merchants, to manufacturers of pillows and beds in distant countries, far from the Surya, who never know who created that white, magnificent stuff, who worked on it with such great care, who made it so indescribably soft, so wonderfully warm, so long-lasting, longer than some people live. Sometimes, when Zofia sits and sorts, when her eyes focus on each single feather, when her fingers work and time passes without her noticing, she gazes out the window. She sees the lakes, glimmering and grey and vast. She sees the forests, dark and mysterious, dense and endless. She sees the other houses in the village, old houses, houses built by her grandparents and their grandparents before them. Everything is grey and green and brown in this autumn. Everything is melancholic and beautiful. Everything is full of time and history. Sometimes she sees a single goose, too, a goose that didn't fly south with the rest, that's still here, alone, perhaps lost. And she watches the bird and thinks, well, that's life, that's nature, that's reality, that's how it must be, that's how it always is. Autumn grows colder and colder. The rain comes, falling in great drops on the windows, on the roof, on the earth. Zofia keeps a small fire in the workshop so it doesn't get too cold, so the feathers dry well, so the wood crackles and the warmth spreads out. The smell of feathers mingles with the smell of wood smoke, with the scent of blessing and time, is a peculiar mixture, a mixture that exists only here, only in this workshop, only in Zofia's world, only here in Masuria. Her wife came to visit sometimes, bringing hot tea, bringing bread with butter, home-baked bread, and they sat together and spoke very little, but it was a good silence, a deep silence.
more meaningful than 100 words. The wife understood that Sophia didn't care much for talking, that the work mattered more than conversation, that the feathers mattered more than the world outside. The hills, the mountains of feathers, they grow and grow. Sophia works 8 hours, 9, 10 a day, sometimes more, sometimes until dusk comes, until the lights go on, until night arrives. Her fingers become red and raw from the fine work, from the concentration, from the heat of the water. But she wraps them in cloth and carries on, because it must be done. This is life. This is what she does. She sorted feathers her whole life long, since she was a young girl, since her mother taught her, and she'll do it till the end, until her hands are too weak, until life is over. The train slows, grows slower still, and night comes like a gentle hand drawn across your eyes, telling you it's time to sleep. Sophia sits somewhere on the train, tired from the work, but quiet in her heart, filled with peace. Her hands lie in her lap, red and rough and beautiful, but proud too. They've sorted so many feathers, brought so much order to chaos, created so much beauty. She knows that somewhere a child is sleeping in a pillow filled with her feathers, sleeping wonderfully, warm and safe, dreaming of geese and lakes. Sleep now, my friend, and dream of Sophia's workshop, of the mountains of white and grey feathers, of the lakes in Missouri, of the call of the geese in the sky as they head south. The train carries you gently into the night, and Sophia sits beside you, caring for you the way she cares for the feathers, with patience and with love, and with 1,000 years of tradition. The train passed through a tunnel, and for a short moment there was only darkness outside, just the rumble, just the echo of the wheels against the tunnel walls. Ta-dam, ta-dam. And then we were out again, and the night took us back like a mother gathering her child into her arms after a brief adventure. I thought how beautiful that is. Tunnel and night, then tunnel again and night again, on and on, and on and on. And after a while, you stop knowing what's outside and what's in, because it all blurs together, becomes one. Because sleep is so close, now you can almost smell it. Lean back, friend, and listen well to me. I'll tell you about an old man named Ioan, who lives in Transylvania and still remembers the way things were, the earlier times, the people and places that don't exist anymore. The train runs from Brasov to Sighisoara, runs through the Carpathians, through Transylvania, through a landscape that is old and dark and full of mystery. The mountains are vast and fill the whole sky, and the forests are deep and dark and full of trees older than most men. Ioan sits by the window and watches the forests, and the forests remind him of his life, of all the years he's spent here, of all the people he's known. He's a very old man now, over 80, his eyes weak and clouded, but his heart is still full of memories, full of stories and images he can't let go of. Stories no one wants to hear anymore, but that he can't forget. When he was young, long ago, before the war, before all the upheavals and catastrophes that split the world in two, he lived on his farm, a beautiful, quiet farm in the hills of Transylvania, under the Carpathians.
And on this farm stood walnut trees, great, old, majestic walnut trees with massive trunks and broad crowns, trees older than his grandfather, older than any war, older than time itself. These trees were his life, they were his wealth, they were everything he had, all that he owned. The walnuts from these trees were legendary throughout the entire region, larger and finer and sweeter than any others, and his name was known across the land, famous among merchants and traders and bakers who wanted his nuts.
Now, so many decades later, he remembers the harvest time, the early autumn when the nuts grew ripe and began to fall slowly to the earth. He was a young man then, strong as an oak, full of energy and life. He would go out with long, heavy wooden staffs, would strike the trees, would make the nuts rain down, would gather them, would lay them in great baskets, would weigh them, would sort them. But that was so long ago. So long ago it seems like another life, like another person entirely. Johan watches out the train window and sees the trees. And he knows there are still trees on his old farm, that perhaps they still bear nuts, that nature carries on, with or without him. But gathering the nuts himself, he can't do that anymore, not alone. His hands are too weak, his strength is gone, his back is too old, his legs too tired for standing. Life has taken all that from him, the way it takes everything, with time and with aging and with sorrow. He often thinks back to his wife, Maria, who died 3 years ago, who died in a cold, damp autumn when the nuts were just ripening and falling from the sky. She was there with him when he gathered the walnuts, all the time, all those decades, all the years he can remember. She held the baskets, she counted the nuts, she laughed like a young girl when a nut would fall on her head and she'd have to duck quickly. They were together, young together, strong together. They built their life together, nut by nut, year by year, harvest by harvest. They'd known each other since childhood. Now she's gone, has gone to a place where he can't follow, where nobody can follow. And he's alone in a train, traveling to a place where he knows no one, to a place he doesn't understand, to Sigiswara, where his daughter lives. A daughter he barely knows because life kept him too busy. The walnuts are brown and round and hard, with a fine shell like leather, like old skin, like life itself. When you break them open, when you crack them with the right tools, you find the meat inside. The kernel, yellow and oily and sweet tasting, sweet as honey, bitter as love. The shells can be sold to dyers, can become color, can become ink, can become things you can't imagine. The scent when the shells crack, that scent is magnificent. It's autumn itself. It's time. The nuts themselves can become oil, golden oil, can become food for kings, can become medicine, can become so many things. Johan knew all of that, knew it precisely, knew it in the deepest part of his heart, knew exactly how to process the nuts, how to store them through the long winters, how to sell them at the markets in the towns.
He knew every trader, every merchant, every baker and pastry chef who wanted his precious nuts. But he forgets now. The memories aren't as clear as they used to be. They've become blurred. They're like dreams. Sometimes he doesn't remember whether the walnut trees still exist, or whether they only exist in his head, only in his memories, only in his nighttime dreams. Sometimes he can't remember whether his wife still lives, or whether she's been dead a long time, whether it's been days or years. Time is all jumbled. It's like a book with pages in the wrong order. Autumn in the train is different from autumn on the farm. It doesn't smell of walnut leaves, not of that magnificent scent of dried leaves. Doesn't smell of damp earth and harvest and work. It smells of dust and of many people and of smoke. It smells of the future, not the past, not of what Johan knows and loves. Johan wants to go back to the trees, to the hills, wants to go back to his wife. But he can't. Time only goes forward, never backward. That's the cruelest truth there is. Another old man sits beside him in the compartment, sits quietly, and gazes out the window too. This man politely asks where he's headed. Johan says, Sigishwara, to somewhere or other. It doesn't really matter. The journey itself is what's important. The man asks him what he does, what he's done in his life. Johan tells him he was a walnut gatherer, but that was long ago, in another life, in another time. The man nods in understanding and says nothing more. It's a pleasant silence, a silence of understanding, a silence between two old men that Johan can comprehend, because this man is old too. This man carries heavy memories with him. This man knows that time always moves on, no matter how hard you try to hold it back. The mountains grow larger, grow more vast. The forests grow darker and darker. Johan closes his eyes and sees the walnut trees before him, sees them clearly, sees every leaf, every branch. He sees the young woman laughing, sees the sun in her hair. He sees the nuts falling from the sky like rain. Everything is golden in the sunlight. Everything is beautiful and vast and real. Everything is gone. The train slows, grows tired almost, grows drowsy. Night comes like a soft blanket. Johan sits and dreams, and his dreams are more real than the reality outside, more alive, more true. In his dreams, he's young, he's strong. In his dreams, his wife is alive and laughing. In his dreams, the trees are tall and full of nuts, full of abundance. In his dreams, life isn't over yet, isn't over, will never be over. Sleep now, my friend, and dream with Johan of the walnut trees in Transylvania, of the golden autumn leaves, of the nuts falling from the sky like rain, of the young woman laughing, of the time that isn't gone. The train carries you into the past, into Johan's past, into your own past, into the past of all people who grow old and remember and know it's finished, yet cannot let go. Sit yourself down, friend, and prepare yourself for a story of work and fire and color. Let me tell you about Erzsébet, who lives in Szeged in Hungary and dries paprikas under her roof eaves year after year. The train runs from Szeged to Pécs, moving slowly through the Hungarian landscape, flat and sprawling, vast beneath a vast golden sun that illuminates everything. Erzsébet sits by the window and watches the paprika fields, so intensely red they seem to turn the whole world red. Red so complete, your eyes can remember nothing else. Your heart itself beginning to blush red from all that color. She knows these fields. She's worked in them her whole life, since she was a young girl. Her mother worked in them, her grandmother too, and her grandmother's mother before that. It's an old craft in her family, older than she herself is, older than wars, older than language, older than time. Autumn is the season when the peppers ripen, when they take on the right color, when they're full of strength and flavor, when they're red as fire. In September and October, when the air is still warm, still gentle, but not the burning heat of summer anymore, that's when the great harvest begins. The harvest Erzsébet waits for all year long. Erzsébet stands in her fields with her sisters and her daughters, with her cousins, with her neighbors, and they all pick the paprikas, all red and large and beautiful and full of power. The peppers lie in great baskets, in heavy sacks, scattered everywhere on the ground, mountains of red gold. Back at home, beneath the eaves of her old house, a house older than Erzsébet herself, hang the garlands. This is the art, this is the craft that Erzsébet loves so dearly, the craft that is her life. She takes the paprikas, takes a long metal needle, takes strong thread, strong as rope, and she begins threading them, one after another, paprika after paprika, fruit after fruit, into long, long garlands that look like red lights, that look like Christmas decoration, that look like celebration. She threads them with great speed. Her hands know the motion, know the rhythm, know the force required, since she was a young girl, since her mother taught her all those years ago, in another time. Her fingers are quick, precise, like dancers performing an old dance. The needle goes through, the paprika slides onto the thread. Another paprika comes. The needle goes in again, faster, faster. Entire garland lengths in a single day, sometimes more. The garlands are then hung beneath the eaves, secured with rope, hung there in the sun and wind, drying slowly, becoming ever darker red as time passes, the color growing more intense, the scent growing richer. The smell from these garlands is indescribable, spicy and intense and magnificent, like the very essence of Hungary itself, like paprika concentrated, like summer captured and held. The whole neighborhood smells of it, every house in the vicinity, every street, every garden. When the windows are open, when the air is warm, when autumn begins, this scent is everywhere. These paprikas will later become paprika powder, the famous Hungarian paprika known and deeply respected throughout the world, a powder that has made kings and generations famous. People everywhere, from Budapest to Paris, from Prague to Istanbul, from American cities to ports in Africa, they know Hungarian paprika. They know the red gold of Hungary, the sharp powder, the sweet powder, the paprika that tells stories. Cooks know the finest paprika comes from Szeged, comes from women like Erzsébet, comes from hands that labor, comes from love. But before all that happens, before it becomes powder, it must dry. It must be given time, the long time, the patience. It must take weeks, sometimes 6 weeks, sometimes 3 months, sometimes longer, depending on the weather, how dry and warm, how favorable the sun. Erzsébet waits patiently, waits the way trees wait for spring, waits the way mountains wait. She checks the paprikas sometimes, touches them gently with her old fingers, sees whether they are dry yet, whether the inner moisture is gone, whether the transformation is complete. She knows exactly when they're ready, knows it in her bones, knows it the way a mother knows her child has slept enough that it can wake up. Autumn slowly becomes winter. The days grow shorter and shorter. The sun sets earlier. The nights grow longer and colder and darker, black as ink. The garlands still hang beneath the eaves, hanging like medals, like trophies, still drying, still scenting the air, still working, their color growing ever darker, ever more intense. The red paprikas have become dark red now, burgundy red, like old wine. Sometimes, when it rains, when cold raindrops fall, Erzsébet must take them down, must go out into the rain, must remove the garlands, must get them to safety if it gets too wet, if the moisture grows too great, if the streams start flowing. She stores them indoors then, in her house, in a special dry room she and her late husband built many years ago. A room with good windows and good ventilation, until the weather improves, until the sun returns. The work isn't easy. The work is hard and lengthy, physically demanding. The hands grow sore from threading, from pressing the needle through the hard, dense paprika flesh, day after day, paprika after paprika, garland length after garland length. The eyes grow tired from focusing, from seeing red, always red, red everywhere. Red in the morning, red at noon, red in the evening, until your eyes ache, until your soul is red, until you dream in crimson. But there's beauty in it. There's deep satisfaction in it. There's real meaning in it. The garlands are beautiful to look at, wonderful to see, magnificent to behold, hanging like red lights beneath the houses, like celebration, like a festival, like a prayer, like a song you can't sing. Her daughters left the town, left the houses, found better, easier jobs in the offices and factories in Budapest, in large houses with air conditioning, with less pain. But Erzsébet, she can't, she won't. This is her life. This is what she is. This is who she is, down to the very core of her soul. She's a paprika dryer. She's a paprika threader. This is her identity. This is her soul. This is the only thing she truly knows, the only thing she understands. Sometimes, when her hands ache, when her back hurts, she thinks about stopping, thinks about going to her daughters. But then autumn comes and the paprikas turn red, and she knows she can't stop. She must thread. She must dry. She must work. The train slows now, grows weary, grows drowsy.
Night comes like a soft blanket. Erzsébet sits in the compartment, tired in her bones but satisfied in her heart. Her hands smell of paprika, strong and spicy. Her face is red from the paprika, red patches everywhere, in the wrinkles, in the furrows that life has carved into her skin. But she smiles. She has worked well. The autumn was good. The harvest was rich. The paprikas were wonderfully red and large. The garlands have become beautiful, have become art. The train carries her into the night, and she sleeps, dreams of red garlands, of paprika scent, of her mother, of her grandmother, of all the women in her family who did the same, hundreds of years reaching back. Sleep now, my friend, and dream with Erzsébet of her roof eaves, of the long, magnificent red paprika garlands hanging like lights, of the spicy, intense scent that fills the whole world, of the warm autumn in Hungary, of work that is beautiful and meaningful, of hands that labor and create, of life repeating itself year after year, autumn after autumn, the way it always has been, the way it always will be, so long as there are people who work, so long as there are still people who love the craft, who can't let it go. Imagine the train running through the spruce forest between Plauen and Hof, and you're sitting by the window. Outside, fresh snow lies on the dark branches, and the tree nursery I want to tell you about hides behind that white silence. I want to tell you about Margareta, a woman who's been doing something for 40 years that almost no one notices, almost no one knows. And yet her work is visible everywhere, if you know where to look. Margareta is in her early 60s, a small woman with steel grey hair always plaited in a thick braid. She gathers spruce cones, not simply gathers, you understand, but with the care of a gold prospector, with the eye of an archaeologist who knows that in every brown, closed cone sleep 100 tiny seeds from which one day mighty spruce trees will grow. Winter is her season, when nature slows her clock and the whole world is dipped in white. The morning I'm thinking of was bitterly cold. It was early December and snow was everywhere, on the branches, on the ground, on the plants and the rocks jutting from the earth. The steam from Margareta's breath hung before her face in fine ice crystals, like the smoke from an old incense figurine, and she could smell the scent of cold air, that pure, sharp smell that only snow brings. She wore 2 layers of wool under her dark green jacket, gloves of llama wool that a granddaughter had knitted years ago, and a great rucksack on her back that had traveled with her for decades. The fabric was frayed at the edges, but the straps were reinforced with thick leather, because Margareta knew that weight adds up, and good tools must endure. She entered the forest at 7 in the morning, as she did almost every day in that season. The snow was ankle deep, and sometimes she slipped on the icy layers beneath, smooth as polished glass. But Margareta was never in a hurry. A good cone gatherer never hurries. From 4 decades of experience, she knew that haste clouds the eyes and the finest cones won't bend to human impatience. The spruces stood close together, like old friends warming each other in that hostile season. They were tall, 30 or 40 meters at least, and their lower branches hung nearly to the ground like outstretched arms. The light of the winter sun fell only in thin golden stripes through the dense needlework. Sometimes Margareta would simply stand still, head tilted back, and watch where that rare light turned golden red between the trunks. It was beautiful there, but there were no good cones. The valuable cones hung on the lower branches of the older trees, where less snow clung and where the cones had already turned brown weeks before. She knelt down carefully so as not to sink too deep into the snow and lose the warmth from her body. She stretched her arm beneath the branches, and her old fingers searched like a blind woman feeling a beloved face. Each single cone she found was briefly weighed in her palm, briefly examined. Had this cone already opened? Was it losing its seed? No, this one was good. The scales still sat firmly closed. This cone she would take. Margarita thought of the tree nursery, the long row of greenhouses where the seeds would germinate. She knew the owner, Herr Richter, an older man like herself who'd devoted his whole life to these trees. He trusted Margarita's judgment completely. He knew she recognized the good cones, those with the right moisture content, the right ripeness, those with the strongest power in their tiny seeds. Each cone Margarita brought was already a small prophecy of 100 new trees, of a century of timber, of playgrounds, of houses, of paper and fuel and life. Hour after hour passed. The snow, sliding from the branches when she moved them too much, fell on her head, on her shoulders, melting in her neck into little streams that ran down her spine. She laughed quietly to herself sometimes. The rucksack grew heavier and heavier. The tree nursery needed about 2,000 good cones in winter. That sounded like a lot, but it was a task that wouldn't be hurried, that could only be fulfilled through patience and daily repetition. Some days she gathered together with other gatherers, women like her who knew and respected this work. On this day, Margarita was alone. She preferred it, really, this solitude among the spruces, this deep stillness broken only by the soft rustling of needles when she moved them, or by the dull sound of a cone dropping to the ground. At midday, she ate a piece of bread she'd wrapped in paper, sourdough from the village bakery, hard and delicious, and drank tea with honey and lemon from her thermos. She sat on a frozen log and watched the movement of the air, how ice crystals sparkled in the sun like tiny diamonds, how the light bounced in 1,000 directions. A bird, a coal tit perhaps, hopped on a branch, its black head in that characteristic tilted position, its white cheeks gleaming in the light. Margarita remained perfectly still so as not to disturb the creature. These moments, these instants between forest and human, were precious to her, sacred even. The snow crunched beneath her steps as she marched deeper into the forest, deeper into that realm of silence and light. She had a system, a pattern she'd developed over decades, a routine that had become a kind of meditation. She knew this part of the forest like her own kitchen, knew each spruce, the tall ones and the medium ones, knew which trees bore the most and largest cones, knew the paths between them, knew too the dangerous places where snow bridged frozen streamlines treacherously, where rocks lay hidden beneath the white. After 30 years, these trees had become old acquaintances, and she greeted them almost like old friends, even calling them names in her mind sometimes, speaking to them in a low, singing voice when she thought no one could hear. The afternoon sun was weak but worn. It painted long shadows between the trunks, and the forest looked like a vast, sleeping creature. The day was drawing to a close. Margarita felt the tiredness in her legs, the pleasant burning in her arms and shoulders, the feeling of fulfillment that only true work brings. She'd filled her rucksack, perhaps 600 cones, perhaps more. She didn't count. That wasn't her way. She'd do that at home, in her warm room, when she spread the cones on tables and selected and arranged them. She left the forest the same way she'd come, her footprints like a red thread leading her safely back home. In the distance, she could see the lights of a house, a window glowing warm as a candle. She could imagine how it smelled in there. Tea, perhaps, warm soup, wood in the stove. She thought of her own kitchen, her warm table, the rest that awaited her. The rucksack pressed heavy on her shoulders, but it was good weight, the weight of a woman who knows she's done something important. The train between Plauen and Hof passes through this forest every day, and none of the passengers know of Margareta and her quiet, continuous work. And now, as the train glides into the night, and the spruces rush past outside like long shadow journeys, imagine Margareta in her kitchen, warming her hands on a cup of tea, already planning tomorrow, the next forest, the next cones, the next trees that will grow from her hands, from her patience, from her quiet, unremarked labor. She's invisible, this woman, and yet her forests are everywhere. Sleep now, reassured by this certainty, that beneath the snow, beneath the earth, new life is growing. That from Margareta's work, a green future is unfolding, one that will endure long after she's gone. And as the train rolled on through the night, ta-dun, ta-dun, I noticed how my thoughts grew slower, how the images in my head grew softer, how the edges blurred. The voices I'd heard became a gentle humming, a humming like distant bees, or like an old song you heard as a child and can't quite remember now. The warm air in the compartment wrapped around me like a blanket, and I felt how my shoulders slowly, very slowly, sank downward. How the tension of the day fell from me, piece by piece, like leaves dropping from a tree, without hurry, without sorrow. Imagine the train running from Offenburg to Triberg through the Black Forest, and you're gazing out into the depths of those dark woods. Snow lies everywhere, and between the trees you can barely make out movement. But there's a woman who could show you what I see when I really look. Her name is Isabel, and she reads tracks the way other people read books. Isabel is 43 and has been a wildlife tracker in the Black Forest for 20 years. It's not an official title, and there's no diploma for this work. But it's what she does. It's what matters, what her life is about. She walks in the snow and follows the trails of animals, the paths they take, the patterns of their movements, the stories they write. The gait of a marten is different from that of a squirrel. A deer walks differently than a fox. A lynx walks entirely differently than either. The snow is like paper, and the animals write their stories there, their fear and hope, their hunting and fleeing, their daily labor, the work of surviving. The morning was early. The snow glittered as Isabel entered the forest, a thick notebook in her pocket, several pencils, a small camera with a macro lens. She wore snowshoes of wood and leather, old hand-knitted socks beneath them, several pairs layered together, and over everything a thick wool shirt her grandfather had worn in the 1950s. The Black Forest in winter was hostile, but also magnificent, honest too. The spruces and firs were so tall you could barely see the sky, only the barest hint of light in narrow gaps. The snow between the trunks was so white it hurt to look at it. She found the first track quickly, only 100 meters from the car.
A track in the snow, small, perfect, clear as a signature. Roe deer tracks, plural. So at least 2 animals had been here, in the night or early morning. She knelt and examined the track more closely. The impression was about 3 centimeters long, the characteristic split of the hooves visible, each print so precise it looked as though an artist had drawn it. She let her pencil glide across the paper and sketched the track, noted the time, the temperature, the snow texture. A deer in the morning cold, not yet warmed up. Isabel followed the track. That was the essence of her work. To follow, not to hunt, but to understand. Where were the deer going? Which path was familiar to them? Which plants were they seeking beneath the snow? After 100 meters, or perhaps 200, she didn't count her steps as she moved slowly forward. She saw that the deer had become alert. The tracks grew deeper, the strides farther apart. The pace had changed from a calm, searching gait to something faster, more frantic. This was flight. Something had frightened them, torn them from their rest. She followed the flight line further, and there she found it. Fox tracks. The predator's spoor crossed the deer's trail, and Isabel could see that the fox had cornered one of the 2 animals, at least to this point. The fox prints were more precise than the deer's, the toes almost in a line, like a coursing hound. But then the fox's track changed. He gave up. The deer were too quick, too nimble. The fox was a clever hunter, but sometimes even he lost. Isabel sat down in the snow and drew. The flight tracks of the deer, the concentrated tracks of the fox, the way everything revealed itself in the snow like a secret. She wrote small notes with her pencil. Fox, about 5 to 6 kilos. Hungry? Predator endurance. Deer escape at approximately 6:45 a.m. Fox follows the outer deer, not the inner one. Failed hunt. The sun still hung low, and the snow was hard and cold, perfect for reading tracks. She stood and followed other trails. A squirrel had climbed up into a tree. The tracks showed the characteristic bounding pattern, the hind feet ahead of the forefeet, which is typical of squirrels, a pattern like a rhythmic poem. The depth of the tracks varied, meaning the animal had sometimes been slower, sometimes faster, sometimes anxious, sometimes slipping in the snow. A bird had landed and flown off again, leaving only the delicate claw impressions and the smudge where the wingtips had brushed the snow as the creature took off. It was a blackbird, probably, judging by the spacing of the claws. The hours passed like breaths. The black forest was silent except for the crunch of snow beneath her shoes, and occasionally, rarely, the call of a bird or the distant crack of a branch beneath snow's weight. Isabel wasn't alone, but she was solitary in the best way. Around her lived hundreds of animals, deer and foxes, martens and squirrels, countless birds. And yet she'd not see them, wouldn't see them. But she saw their tracks, saw their paths, saw their fear and their rest written in the white language of snow, like text in an ancient tongue. At midday, she found something rare. Lynx tracks. She went completely still when she recognized them, absolutely motionless. Only the steam from her breath in the cold air, and even that seemed to freeze in the unexpected silence. A lynx in the Black Forest. That was rare. That was extraordinary. Wilderness had brought a great predator back to this forest after decades of absence. She photographed the tracks from various angles, drew them with the greatest care, measured the length and width and depth of the claw impressions. 4 centimeters long. Powerful.
This was a strong animal, male probably. Isabel had been lucky. Many people would search their whole lives and never see a genuine lynx track. This track was a gift, an omen, a sign that the world was still wild, that nature had reclaimed itself in these deep black forest places. The afternoon sun grew lower, painted long red lines between the tree trunks, like blood or fire. The snow began to gleam in that cold light, the shadows turned blue as ink, and the whole world took on the character of a dream. Isabel was slowly growing tired, but it was good tiredness, the tiredness of someone who's found something precious, something that can't be bought with money. She'd found a story in the snow, a drama of hunting and flight, of survival and death, of wilderness that sustained itself and revealed its secrets to anyone awake enough to see it, attentive enough to look. She left the forest the same way she'd come. Her footprints led her back, and she could see how the sun had made her own shadows very long in that short winter day. The path was long and it grew cold, but Isabel barely noticed, too immersed still in the stories she'd read in the snow language. In the notes she'd made were 100 small observations, 100 small stories. A squirrel that had dug a hole and then run away, perhaps without finding what it sought, perhaps successfully or not, only the squirrel knew. Pigeon tracks showing that the birds pecked in the snow for seeds. A weasel, thin and quick, whose track was like nothing but a thin wire mark in the snow, as if someone had drawn a line with a pencil. And somewhere out there, in the depths of the black forest, the lynx was making its way, invisible, but not unnoticed. And now, as the train runs from Offenburg to Treberg, and the dark forests rush past like an endless cathedral of wood and snow, imagine Isabel in her room, organizing her notes. She writes down what she found, where the animals were, how they lived, how they survived, how they died, how they hunted. She's the invisible chronicler of these forests, the reader of the silent language of snowfields. And you, if you could look as she does, would see that beneath the white, a whole world of life and adventure exists, waiting only to be read. A world older than people and more beautiful. Sleep now with this certainty. And somewhere in that dark landscape, I thought still, other people sleep now in their beds, in their houses, and the moon watches over them. And the moon watches over us, and everything is in its place. The fields are in their place, the forests are in theirs, the rivers in theirs, and I'm in mine. Here in this carriage, here in this warm cradle of wood and cloth and metal that carries me where I need to go, without me needing to be awake, without me needing to do anything but trust and rest.